I don't know what that looks like, how it would happen, but follow us on all the things, and we'll make sure we get it out to everybody and anybody we can, just in case weather gets bad. We actually had snow yesterday. I don't know if, did you guys here have snow? Yeah. We saw flakes. So, still not working. Oh, there it is. Maybe we did all that. Casey and I are going to this Come to the Table conference. And I just wanted to read an excerpt why this is so passionate to me. I know I kind of probably harp on it every week, but it's from this book called Freedom Fight. They gave it out at the pastor's conference last year. It's going to take a bit to read it, but I think it's important just so you understand where we're at as a society. Pornhub, the largest pornography website in the world, released traffic statistics for 2019. The website boasted 42 billion visits, 115 million daily visits, 170 years of new content created. This was during COVID. American porn use every day in the United States are estimated 2.5 billion emails sent that contain pornographic material, 68 million searches related to pornography, 116,000 searches for child pornography. The percentage of men in each age group who view porn at least once a month, 18 through 30, 79%, 31 through 49 years old, 67%, 50 through 68, 49%. Several times a week, 18 through 30, 63%, 31 through 49, 38%, 50 through 68, 25%. Pornhub reported 32% of the people that visit it are women. How about in the church? Non-Christian men are about 65% routinely viewing pornography. The statistic in the church, 64%. This is why I'm passionate about this stuff. There's more and more, but I don't want to get us down before we even get started. But this is why I'm passionate about it. This is a great book. It's a course too. It's 6 months. I've gone through it once. I'm going through it a second time because I've had my own issues. If we don't, as a church, address this issue, if we don't, this is the number one, I believe, sin in the church right now, especially for that younger generation. If we don't address it now, I don't think the church is going to exist in another generation or two. Because the statistics are, for those who view these things, the way that they feel about marriage changes, the way they feel about transgender changes. So the more they view this, the more they become numb, the more those foundations that were set by our forefathers and the scriptures itself are being tossed aside. So we all want revival. We've all prayed for it. We want it here in Montgomery County. One of the ways to do that is take this thing that is shame-causing and done in secret and put light into it. And that's the only way, I believe, revival always started, every time I've read it, in a prayer meeting. It never started in a church service. So don't get excited when I'm preaching thinking we're about to break out in revival. Most of the time, I'm just still trying to stay awake while I'm preaching. But it's going to be when we address these issues, these hard ones. If you have kids or grandkids, please find protection for them. Because you wouldn't give your child $200 and tell them to walk down in Vegas, the main street. But them having access to the internet is worse. So without any filtration. So please, if you need help with filters or phone blocks or all that stuff, we've become pretty proficient at that, actually. We've tried a few different ones, so we would be willing to help however long it takes, whatever you need, we will walk you through that. So that's why I find this so important. That's why we're going to be going to it, and I'm praying God uses it and blesses it. I put this up every week. We're praying for a Calvary Bible Institute East Coast. They're all over the world, you see. We don't have one here on the East Coast. I know last week a few asked about it. It's a 10-month course straight through the Bible, Genesis to Revelations. When you come out of this, you have an entire commentary you wrote on the Bible. So from Genesis to Revelation. So that's why I'm passionate about it. I see the churches that have this and how alive they are, and I want it. So we'll see what God does. Not many ways to serve here. If you do want to serve here, there is Sunday school. Eli's been serving a life sentence over there. No, I'm joking. He enjoys it a lot. But just for him to get a break from time to time would be good. So if somebody would love to step up and do Sunday school, and then I do this Billy Graham ministry. If you want more information, I'll talk to you afterwards on what this is. We're going to the Rio today. We're going to see Jesus Revolution. I'm very excited. 3 p.m. we're going to be there. We're going out to eat. I don't know if we're all going together. I don't know how that's going to work because everybody's picky and likes different foods. So we'll coordinate after. But yeah, we're going to the movie. We have some flyers we're going to hand out. They handed out flyers, I think Friday and another day. And people seemed excited. There's a Calvary Chapel here. So let's see what God does. And with all that, let's open our Bibles to John chapter 9. We are making our way through John. I am excited. We're going to read. We ended in verse 3 last week, kind of an odd place to end, but I felt like that's where the Lord was leading. So I'm going to read all the way from 1 to 34, a lot of reading. But again, this was written, as I have up on the screen, that believing you may have life in his name. When Jesus does a miracle in the book of John, John calls it a sign. It's a sign of who he is, and we'll see a lot of that today. I'm very excited to do this message today, which sometimes, I'll be honest, I'm human. I'm like, do I really got to preach this, Lord? But this one's good. So I like this one. John chapter 9, verse 1. Let me get a drink of water. Now, as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. When he had said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay with saliva. Then he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And he said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. Therefore the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said, it is not this he who sat and begged. Some said, this is he. Others said, he is like him. He said, I am he. Therefore they said to him, how were your eyes opened? He answered and said, a man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and I received sight. And they said to him, where is he? He said, I don't know. They brought him who formerly was blind to the Pharisees. Now it was Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees asked him again how he had received his sight. He said to them, he put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Therefore some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath. Others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was a division among them. They said to the blind man, what do you say about him because he opened your eyes? He said, he is a prophet. But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight, until they called his parents of him who had received his sight. And they asked him, saying, is this your son who was born blind? How then does he see now? His parents answered them and said, we know that this is our son, and we know that he was born blind. But by what means he now sees, we do not know, or who opened his eyes, we do not know. He is of age, ask him. He will speak for himself. His parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had agreed already that if anyone confessed that he was the Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, he is of age, ask him. So they again called the man who was blind and said, give God the glory. We know that this man is a sinner. He answered and said, whether he is a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see. Then they said to him again, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered them, I told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? Then they reviled him and said, you are his disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, we do not know where he is from. The man answered to them, well, this is a marvelous thing that you do not know where he is from, yet he has opened my eyes. Now we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, he hears him. Since the world began, it has been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. They answered and said to him, you were completely born in sins, and you're teaching us? And they cast him out. And Father, I thank you for this, Lord, one of the most powerful lines in Scripture, Lord. We were blind, but now we see. And I pray that we see you today, Lord, that you open the eyes of our heart, that you shine light in the dark places, Lord. Just be with us, minister to us, teach us, Lord, and may you get all the honor and glory out of this. In Jesus' name, amen. So to recap, all the way to the beginning of chapter 8, we're still most likely following through with that. The woman caught in adultery was brought in while Jesus was teaching in the temple courts. He wisely deals with that. He goes through, he talks about how he is his own witness, that he has the right to speak for himself, that he and the Father are one. He goes through that whole discourse. He does the very famous line in there, the truth shall make you free. And he ends with, before Abraham was, I am. They don't like that because he's claiming to be God. They pick up stones to stone him, and he hides and he gets away and is snuck out. But like Jesus does, he comes out around the temple. I believe this is all consistent. This is happening in a flow. Sometimes maybe later on when we get through this, how often they called him back, was it the next day? We don't really know. But I think this is very sequential. So he's outside there, this blind man. They look at him and said, who sinned, him or his father? They're concerned about theology and discussing this. Jesus is concerned about this man. And he's concerned about doing the works of God. So he heals him as we get to today. But one thing I wanted to point out is he saw the blind man. He didn't miss him. He's running for his life, essentially, and he looks and he sees a blind man. And he doesn't pass him up. And that's you too. He does not miss whatever circumstance we're in, whatever hard thing we're in. We'll get more into that, but I feel like I need to hammer this away right in the beginning. He doesn't miss it. Not ever. Not no matter what else is going on. He sees it. And he says in verse 5, I must work the works of him who sent me. The night is coming when no one can work. And as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. The ego in me, again, I am alone. Me and me only. I am the light of the world. We read these stories and they get familiar. I grew up in the church. I was one of those. If you were the Sunday school teacher, you probably hated me because I tried to outsmart you all the time. That was me being cocky. And you hear these stories over and over again, and you know them, and you see through them, but this was a real man, blind from birth. And imagine what he was taught as we went through last week when the disciples asked, who sinned, him or his father? Imagine being a child, why am I blind? And the parents explaining, well, we must have sinned or you must have sinned. Imagine that explanation being given to him. That's how he has grown up. That is his life. He has no way to provide, so now he sits outside the temple and is a beggar. He's a real man in real pain with real agony for all of his life. We don't get an idea how old he is, old enough that he could speak for himself, because his parents are like, hey, ask him, don't ask us, ask this guy over here. They don't want to deal with it. Spurgeon said this, whenever you see a man in sorrow and trouble, the way to look at it is not to blame him and inquire how he came there, but to say, here is an opening for God's almighty love. Here is an occasion for the display of grace and goodness of our Lord. We need to be doing that today. Another old saying goes, only one life 'twill soon be past, only what's done in Christ will last. I like that phrase. We are to be redeeming the time, not getting caught up in theology debates about what's going on. We're to be redeeming the time, sharing Christ. And hopefully we'll be doing that today as we give out some pamphlets and stuff. When he had seen these things, verse 6, he spat on the ground and made clay with saliva. And he anointed the eyes of the blind man with clay. And he said to them, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. If you're like me in this post-COVID culture, the first thing you think of is when he spit in the ground is how unsanitary and nasty is that? Where is his mask? He should have a mask on. What is he doing? But Jesus didn't care about any of that. Spittle in this day was actually thought of to be healing. It was actually, some believe that the spit, especially of a distinguished person, could cause healing. I think Jesus is playing on that a little bit. I think the other reason that he used clay, and I've always wondered, why did he do it this way? Because it's Jesus, right? He could say, be opened, and they would have been opened instantly, instantaneous, like he's going to do with Lazarus when we get there in the next chapter. Come out. He could come out. But Jesus did this one different. And one reason he did it is we know why. Because if he would have done every miracle the same way, we would be trying to recreate it over and over and over again, because that's what we do, right? We're looking for some sort of system or some sort of tradition that'll make us feel better, and we try to replicate it over and over and over again. So I believe Jesus did this one different for multiple reasons. I think one of the things is he just said, I am, I am. He said, before Abraham was, I am. He took clay and put it on the man's eyes. When God created man, he breathed into the dust of ground. I think this is a way of him showing that he is God and he can restore with the earth of the ground, just like God created life from the earth of the ground. I think also that he did this so the guy knew what was going on. Now, again, he could have said opened, but I think there was another reason. Jesus didn't want him to see him yet. Because by the time he goes in front of the Pharisees, he'll say, or the neighbors ask him, well, who did this to you? He goes, I don't know what he looks like. I just started seeing. I don't know who he is. So I think that was why. I think it was also to be an irritant. Did you ever get anything in your eye? So it was like 3 weeks ago at work, they made us all sign this thing about not spraying things in our eyes. You know why that is? Because somebody sprayed something in their eye. We work with all kinds of crazy chemicals. We come to find out 2 guys had spray bottles, and for whatever dumb reason, they thought it'd be funny to spray each other. They thought it was water. But we work with some pretty harsh chemicals, and there's eye washing stations all over the place. So we all had to sign a thing saying we're not going to aim spray bottles at each other's face and shoot them. I was asking what grade I'm in again that week. But it was an irritant, right? This guy had an irritant in his eye. And the thing, I don't know if you ever got an eyelash. We're old enough. We've gotten eyelashes. It drives you crazy. It drives you nuts. All you're doing is rubbing and itching at your eye. So Jesus puts clay in his eye as an irritant. And I think that's very, very deliberate. Because it's in the times when we're irritated and things bother us that he says, go wash. And the washing is the water of the word. It says in Ephesians 5. In John 15:3, it says, you are clean through the word which I have spoken to you. When you're irritated, when something is bothering you, go to the place you were sent, Shalom, the word, and wash. Sit with Jesus. Let it be irritating. Let it be what it is. Some of the greatest psalms we have from David is when he was depressed, when he was down, when he was lonely. And those words are such great comfort to us. Take time and sit with the word. When it's irritated, when it's hurting, when it's bothering you. Again, he died on the cross for us so we could be with him. So be with him. That's what he wants. Can you imagine God bend down to us to be with us so we could meet him? And that's what he wants. And through the word is the way he speaks. I think he also put the clay on this guy's eye, so this guy had a way to respond in faith. Hebrews says that, I've been reading James this week, and James says faith without works is dead. It is faith alone, but it's not faith alone. That the faith inside us should have an outward working. So he gives this guy a way to respond. Me, I probably would have said, this is offensive and gross, and get it off my eyes. I can't stand things on my eyes. But this guy, he gave him a way to respond. Now, this guy could have ran to the closest whatever water there was, too. Now, he couldn't see, so somebody would have had to leave him. But he went exactly where Jesus told him to go. Interesting enough, this week I was listening to some things. And did you know in England, you cannot say Christ alone is the only way to salvation? Christ alone is the only way to heaven. That's offensive in England. Did you know Focus on the Family cannot broadcast inside Canada? They put all their antennas on the edge of Canada and broadcast in because they're not allowed to say that a man and a woman is all that marriage is. It's nothing else. So they're not allowed to broadcast within Canada. The gospel is offensive, and it's going to become more offensive. Therefore, to you who believe, he is precious, but to those who are disobedient, the stone which the builders rejected has become a chief cornerstone, and a stumbling block, a rock of offense. They stumble, being disobedient to the word to which they were appointed. What's interesting about the Pool of Siloam, it was sent by Hezekiah. Hezekiah built a tunnel. We have a cat named Hezekiah, so I can only think of our cat when I say Hezekiah now. But it was sent through a conduit in the city. So Hezekiah built this tunnel. That's why it's called sent. He had provided water for them. Also, when Jesus came, one of the things I think the idea of the mud, to make this slightly more dramatic, was because one of the signs of the Messiah was that he was going to open the eyes of the blind. In Isaiah 42, 6 through 7 says, I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness and will hold your hand. I will keep you, give you as a covenant to the people, as a light to the Gentiles, to open blind eyes, to bring out prisoners from the prison, those who sit in darkness from the prison house. We're about to see a comparison now. Jesus opened the eyes of this man, and now you're going to see people whose eyes are shut. And they are shut deliberately, and they are shut tight. And they're like the little kid when you want to play hide and seek when they're real little, and all they do is just stand there and shut their eyes real tight because they think they're hidden because you can't see them. That's what these guys are doing. They're standing there with their eyes spiritually sealed tight. This is the only time in Scripture, and we'll hear that later, that the eyes of someone were open that were born blind. This is the only time. So again, just to reiterate, Jesus came out of the temple. He was hiding for his life, sees this guy sitting here, tells him to go wash in Siloam, and he doesn't miss him. And I just want to hammer that home. He's the light of the world. He's the only one that can do this, so he does it. There are callings in our life that God has placed on all of us. He said that we are preordained for good works, that he has set something aside for you to do. He has not called you and told you to go watch Netflix and Disney Plus. That's me. But he has called us something he has specifically for us. And that comes back to going back to Siloam. Go sitting with the word. Lord, what do you have for me? And then lead me. And then the hard part, step out in faith. This journey here in this church was a giant step in faith, biggest one I've ever done in my life. And I can't believe there's anybody sitting here besides my wife, because she knows she has to. But God has done an amazing work. And I'm watching him work over and over again. And any time that I get lacking and that I feel a need, he just steps right in again. He's like, what are you worried about? Are you blind? Do I have to open how many times do I have to open your eyes? Matt, how many times? I always say one more. Just one more. So John 9, 8 through 12. Therefore the neighbors who had previously seen that he was blind said, it is not this, it's he who sat and begged. Some said, this is he. Others said, he is like him. He said, I am he. Therefore they said to him, how were your eyes open? He said to them, a man called Jesus made clay, anointed my eyes, and said to me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So I went and washed and received sight. And then she said to him, where is he? He said, I do not know. What a bummer. You finally get to see, and now nobody recognizes you. It's like they can't see you now. So this guy finally gets his vision. He's walking around. He can see, and they're like, well, you're not him. You're not the guy that sat there. He's like, I'm him. Frank, you walk by every day and say, how are things looking? You know, what's going on? It's me. How? And think about like this day and age, right? Like we compare this probably to what goes on with us. We build our fences 8 feet high and secure so nobody can see. And in that day, your neighbors were your coworkers and your family. So he's side by side with his neighbors, with his family, and now they're questioning, is this even you? But what I love is he's radically changed to the point they don't even recognize him anymore. He is so different. He is so changed that they're like, is this the same guy? Now, of course, nobody believes that a guy born blind would be seeing because that's ridiculous. Only God can do that. And so there's two camps here. There's, of course, those that believe and those that don't believe. So these are the neighbors. They're asking, where is he? And I hope that's our testimony. When we explain what Jesus Christ did in our own life and what he's done for us, I hope and pray they say, where is this God? Where is he? Why are you different? Why do you see things I don't see? Why are you so secure? Why are you not taking 15 anxiety and depression meds? Like, what's going on with you? Why are you so different? And hopefully we can say, it's him. See, I was blind and now I see. I was a beggar and I found bread. I needed leading and I found a shepherd. And all the I am statements that Jesus has. I love how he just calls him a man named Jesus. We're going to watch a progression with him because it starts as a man named Jesus, then it's a prophet, and by the time he runs into him, which will be next week, he'll call him Lord. So now the neighbors are confused. They don't know if this is him. This has never been done. This is a question throughout the neighborhood. So they take him to the authorities, to the Pharisees. So verse 13, they brought him who formerly was blind to the Pharisees. I like that. Formerly was blind. Now it was Sabbath when Jesus made clay. In my head, I have that dun dun dun, because it's Sabbath again, and they don't like when he does things on the Sabbath. And he opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also asked him again how he had received his sight. And he said to them, he put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Therefore, some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath. Others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such things? And there was a division among them. So again, he's brought to the Pharisees before them, and that word asked is continuous. He asked, and they asked, and they asked. This is an interrogation. They are trying to get him to change his story. They're trying to get him to falter in some sort of way. So they're asking and asking and asking. And the poor guy has been blind his whole life and apparently got healed on the wrong day. But that's how they look at it. I love Jesus in the fact that he heals 7 times. I have him up there. 7 times on the Sabbath. And I believe that was to challenge each and every one of them. If you remember the first one, I have the references up there, the man with the withered hand. He walks right into the temple and heals them right in front of all of them. The unclean spirit. There was a guy in the temple again with an unclean spirit. Peter's mother-in-law was healed on the Sabbath. There was the disabling spirit, the woman that was bent over, the man who had dropsy, the man at the pool of Bethesda, which we've gone through in John, and now this guy, the man born of birth. So Sabbath, well, let me address this first. So there was 2 schools of thought in the Pharisees. There's 2 big names, Shammai and Hillel. Shammai said the law is supreme. You do not ever violate the law. There was already a division. When it says that there was a division in there was already a division in the religious leaders between the Shammai and Hillel. So Shammai is a stickler for the law. The law is supreme. Nothing can ever, at any point of any time, violate the law. Hillel was a little different. He said if there has been an act of mercy or something important has happened that doesn't break the Sabbath, it's okay. But you can break the Sabbath. In Shammai, I'm trying to say these names. Shammai's school of thought, if you broke your arm on the Sabbath, you couldn't do anything about it. You could, if someone was dying, stop them from dying the best of your ability. But you couldn't do beyond that. So if you broke your arm, they wouldn't set it. If you had a gushing wound and it didn't look like you were going to die, they wouldn't do anything about it. They would let you go. So any of these things that would go on Sabbath, they wouldn't address it. They wouldn't do it on the Sabbath because that was work. And they didn't want to say work. Now, Hillel is on the other side. He's like, if it's an act of mercy, if it's an act of grace, if we're trying to help somebody, of course, go ahead, help that person. So they have these 2 interpretations about the law they're already battling. Now, he said, if you noticed, the blind man leaves out that he spit on the ground and made clay. He just said he used clay. He left that out when he addressed them. I think that was deliberate. He didn't want them to hear that. But one of the rules of the Sabbath, not a law, but one of the rules that they had made, was that you could only spit on a rock on the Sabbath day, because if you spit on the ground and it rolled, that would be plowing, and now you've worked. So you couldn't spit on the ground. You had to spit on a rock. Some of the other crazy rules, like a woman couldn't look in a mirror on the Sabbath because she might pluck a gray hair, and that was harvesting. So you couldn't look in, women were not allowed to look in mirrors. And they have all these just rules on top of rules, piled on rules, till they felt so righteous they were afraid to lose that power. And that's what we see what's going on here. So Jesus, imagine this. He spits on the ground and he made clay. So now he's plowing and he's kneading. Kneading was not allowed on the Sabbath either when he made clay. So they would be all kinds of bent out of shape if they knew how the clay was made. I like the minorities question in this group here. A lot of people think this is Nicodemus because he says, how can a sinner do such a miraculous sign? And it's kind of a view back when Nicodemus said in John 3:2, no one can perform the miraculous signs you are doing if God were not with him, right before John 3:16. So it seems like that could have been Nicodemus. It doesn't matter. I'm also wondering, is Saul there? Who's going to be Paul? Is he in the middle of this? Is he watching all this? Because his heart is going to be, obviously, is with the first school of thought. He's the very strict, but somewhere along the road, he's going to run into Jesus. Was he there? Was he watching all this? So there's three attitudes to Jesus in that, and I believe these are the three attitudes that you can have today. There was the wonder of the neighbors, the people that just wonder, what was Jesus? What was he all about? There's the testimony of the healed man. I was blind, but now I see. And there's the skepticism of the religious leaders. I believe that's the same three attitudes we have today. There's skepticism. I remember talking to a guy one time. He said, I don't even believe Jesus existed. And I'm like, well, then how do you decide what's true in ancient history or not? And he's like, well, I don't know. I said, obviously. I'm not always nice. I try. But the testimony of the healed man, I was blind, but now I see. That's where we are. That's us. And then there's the wonder of the neighbors. They were wondering about this Jesus. Where is he? Can we meet him? Again, I think that's the three attitudes we see today in the world. 9:17 says that they said to the blind man, what do you say about him because he opened your eyes? He said he is a prophet. I don't understand why they would even ask him. Like, what do you care what his opinion is? You're going to wind up throwing him out at the end of all of this anyways. Why do you care? But they asked him what his opinion is. Now he says, I think he's a prophet. Now we've gone from Jesus the man to Jesus the prophet. And with some of these rules on top of rules, piled on more rules, and I can't remember the exact writing, it said that prophets were allowed to violate the Sabbath. That there was a specific clause in some of these, not in the law, but in their rules, prophets were allowed. So they don't even want him to say that he's a prophet because they're trying to get him. So now they're going to shut him up. They jump after him. So they come after him, verse 18. But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight until they called the parents of him who had received his sight. And they asked him, saying, is this your son who you say was born blind? Then how does he see? His parents answered him and said, we know that this is our son and that he was born blind. But by what means he now sees, we do not know, or who opened his eyes, we do not know. He is of age, ask him, he will speak for himself. His parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed, if anyone confessed that he was Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore the parents said, he is of age, ask him. So they asked three main questions. Is this your son? The answer is yes. Was he born blind? Yes. How does he see? We don't know. Now, a lot of people think that they're passing this off, they're passing the buck, and they probably are, because it explains later on, John gives us that dialogue where that anybody that says he's Christ, they would be thrown out. So they're probably passing the buck, but there was also within the law, they had to be eyewitnesses to see it. And who knows if they were there or not. It doesn't say that they were. So I try to give them a little grace, a little credit, that they're like, we weren't here, we didn't see this, we don't know, ask him, he's old enough. They said that they would be thrown out. So again, our American culture, if we don't like what's going in a church, we just walk a block and go to the next one. So it's not like that in this today. There is the Sanhedrin, which rules all of Judaism, all the temples, all of the tabernacles, or any temple around, any synagogue, that's the word I'm looking for, around, answered to the authority of the Sanhedrin. So if you're thrown out, you're thrown out. So there was 3-step process. One, you're thrown out for 30 days. 30 days. One thing I read said that you can eat with your family as long as there's 3 seats between you and the closest person, and nobody's to speak to them while they're eating. If you can't do that, then you have to eat after everybody else is done eating. So imagine this: if you own a Jewish business, nobody's going to buy from you. All your employees are going to quit, and for 30 days you have nothing. You have no income. If you work for them, you have to quit. You're out of job. So it's an inconvenience for everybody. If there's a funeral, if there's a wedding, within those 30 days, you're not allowed to go. You're not allowed to be in that social circle. After 30 days, they bring you back and they'll ask you, will you recant your statement? If you say no, you are then deemed like a leper, and you are not allowed within the town. You are thrown out of your family, thrown out of your house, and not to be dealt with at all anymore. That's how serious it is when they say that they'll be put out of the synagogue. It's just not, you can't come into the synagogue and sacrifice. You are ousted from Jewish community. So that's how serious it is. So that's why I try to give the parents a little bit of grace. He's going to get the better end of this deal anyways. We're not going to get to that next chapter, but he gets the better deal. So verses 24 and 25, so again, they called the man who was blind and said to him, "Give God the glory. We know this man is a sinner." He answered and said, "Whether he is a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I know, though, I was blind, and now I see." And that's why we sang the Amazing Grace thing. I couldn't get out of my head as I read this over and over this week. I was blind, but now I see was just echoing in my head all week. When they say give God the glory, that's a swearing in. Like when you go to court today, lay your hand on the Bible and swear in. Give God the glory is a swearing in. So they're saying, you better be honest now with what you're telling us. And then they say, this man is a sinner. Which is funny because if you remember the end of last chapter, Jesus went in front of them when they were standing there and said, "Which of you convicts me of sin?" He asked them. He gave them, "Go ahead, accuse him." And nobody said a thing. But now they're saying he's a sinner, though they're not identifying what sin he has. They couldn't contradict him, and the parents had confirmed it. So by law, he is now, what he said is true. He was born blind, he was their child, and now he sees. That's evidenced by everybody. So they're trying again to trap him. And I love how he just says, "The one thing I know is I was blind, and now I see." And people will argue and people will debate, and they're going to try to trap you up. Don't get trapped. Because all you have to say is, "I was blind and now I see. I'm a sinner and now I'm set free." And that's it. We don't have to overcomplicate it. And I've been in discussions where people want to go rounds and they want to get in the details of creation and they want to get into Moses and they want to get into all the miracles. And all I can say is, look, I know how I was and I know what I am now. I was blind and now I see. And one thing you can't take from people is their personal testimony. It's by the blood of the Lamb and the testimony, right? So it's by those two things that we will overcome, it says in Revelation. Verse 26 and 28, they said to him again, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them and told them already, "You did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to be his disciples?" I think he's funny. I actually think this guy's got a sarcastic side and a little bit of sense of humor here. If I was him, when they start asking it like, "Again, you're asking again," I'd be like, "Well, he made me see. Maybe he can help you with your hearing." That's what's going through my mind when I hear this. Maybe we can get him to come in and touch your ears or put mud in your ears, and you guys will be able to hear it because you're asking again. When he says, "Do you want to be disciples again?" he is claiming to be a disciple of Jesus. He is making that abundantly clear. That's why they're going to answer the way that he does. And we're going to get to that now. Verse 29, and they reviled him and said, "You are his disciples, but we are Moses's. And we know God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, we do not know where he is from. Yet he had opened my eyes. Now we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, he hears him. Since the world began, it has been unheard of that anyone opened the eyes of one who was blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered and said to him, "You were completely born in your sins, and you're teaching us." And they cast him out. So they attempt to discredit him. That doesn't work because he doesn't care. What had this religious system ever done for him? It had him sitting outside the gate begging. But Jesus saw him in the middle of a corrupt religious system and healed him and touched him. So what does you can tell, I think, the way he talks, he doesn't have a care in the world. I think he's honestly thinking, this is the first few days I see, and you keep bringing me in this dark, dingy robe, and you're all dressed up. I want to see the clouds. I want to see the sky. I want to see the birds. I want to go see the ocean. I want to see all these things. Just want to look at my mom and dad's face, who I've heard their voice since I was a child. I want to look at them. And you got me in here listening to you guys? And I think he just gives it right back to him. And I love his heart. I love he's you want to follow him too? Of course they don't. And imagine, so when they say it's a marvelous thing, we don't even know where he's from, and he says, "Oh, that's a marvelous thing." It's like, you guys are the biggest brains in this area, right? You're the top smart guys, and you don't even know where he's from. You haven't figured this out yet. Wasn't he just here yesterday? Wasn't he here? Haven't you been talking to him, and you still don't know where he's from? I think again he's egging him on. He's provoking him a little bit, and he says this: "My eyes are opened. God doesn't hear sinners." Here's his facts. If you worship God, he hears you. And no one has ever opened the eyes of a man born blind. With this logic, how could this man not be from God? And they're stuck. And all they can say is, you're a sinner. We're not listening to you. Get out. So he's excommunicated, to make that clear. And that excommunicated is exactly what I said before. He's done. He's cast out. He's lost in the Jewish community. But verse 35, we're not going to go there. Jesus found him again. He goes and he finds him again. He doesn't leave him just cast out by a hollow religious system. These religious leaders abused him when they said they reviled him. They insulted him. You were completely born in sins. And they rejected him and they cast him out. But don't think too harshly of him. One of the commentators I said had this quote: when sharing the gospel, think of it like throwing a stone into a pack of dogs. The one that yelps is the one that got hit. I like that. Don't let people get you down. Don't let people argue with you. Oscar, could you hand out? We're going to do communion together. We haven't done it yet this year. But this is almost a one-point message. I was blind, but now I see. I'm a sinner, now I'm saved by grace of God. It doesn't have to be complicated. Don't let people bog you down. Don't let people rip into you. Don't let them tell you don't know. It's okay you don't know. All I do know is I know a man named Jesus who has set me free. And so we're going to take communion together. We haven't done that yet this year. I'm going to get some music ready.